They talk about the war on drugs. We need to legalise drugs because the war on drugs is lost. That's not the real war. What it's really about is a war for drugs. Hi and welcome to another episode of Family Matters. If you thought the Cannabis Referendum last year had settled the issue of legalising the drug for recreational use, you'd be hugely mistaken. As I mentioned in a previous episode, rust never sleeps. Drug campaigner and ex-Prime Minister Helen Clark, before the referendum, even admitted that if her side were to lose, which they did, there would be other ways to force the issue.
Look, there's always prospects of private members' bills and getting Parliament to revisit it, and the way the election's looking, there could be quite a big progressive majority in Parliament, who knows?
Democracy? Only if they win. You'll note that the no vote in the euthanasia referendum has graciously and respectfully accepted the result, despite how gutted we feel and our ongoing concerns about the new law, which we will keep monitoring. And you can guarantee that if the cannabis result had been the other way around, the yes side had just won 50.1% yes and 49.9% no, the law would be being introduced as we speak. They're not very good losers, are they? As we know, Chloe and the Greens are obsessed with this issue. And she and most of the media were back campaigning on the issue last week with a new poll from none other than the Helen Clark Foundation. So it was featured on Breakfast on One. Note that they only went to the yes side, as usual.
A new poll released today by the Helen Clark Foundation suggests there may be life in it yet, with the combination of those who favour legislation or decriminalisation coming to a total of 69%. Well, joining us from our Wellington studio to provide her interpretation of the figures is cannabis reform advocate and Green Party MP Chloe Swarbrick. Morena, Chloe, how are you this morning?
Morena, I'm good, thank you.
And the AM show, once again, only to the yes side.
So that research carried out by the Helen Clark Foundation leaves us wondering what's next on this leafy issue. Joining us now is the Foundation's Executive Director, Kathy Errington. Kathy, g'day, good morning.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome.
And on One News. Now, this item is factually wrong. It's atrocious reporting, as you'll see. They will tell you that 69% would now support the bill, would vote yes. No, it doesn't say that at all. The 69% is based on a combination of those preferring decriminalisation, 20%, and of those wanting legalisation, 49%. Two very different things. But One News is trying to suggest that the 69% represents a yes vote for legalisation. Have a watch.
A new report is revealing support for cannabis legislation or decriminalisation is now backed by voters of almost every party in government. That's according to a poll released by the Helen Clark Foundation from an online survey of more than 1,000 Kiwis. 69% now say they would support the bill, a significant increase on the 48.4% of voters who backed legalisation in the 2020 referendum.
Can you see just how misleading the media are being on this? The really funny bit is that the polling company used by Helen Clark got their polling wrong before the referendum.
A new poll, I'm glad we got this clarified, a new poll out this morning shows cannabis legalisation is on track to pass in a couple of weeks. This poll comes from UMR and shows 49% of voters are backing a yes vote, while 45% said they were voting no.
Yes, they predicted the yes vote would win by 4, the yes vote lost by almost 3. So should we take too much notice of this poll? Here's a really important point not covered in the media reports. New Zealand has effectively decriminalised all drugs, not just cannabis, all drugs, meth, cocaine. The Law Society and the Police Association said this in 2019 when the Misuse of Drugs Amendment Bill was introduced by the government, that it would effectively decriminalise all drug use and possession. And that destroys the myth that smoking a joint will result in a prison sentence. I mean, do you know how hard it is to get into prison these days? But here's the proof of the decriminalisation effect that we already have. From the latest Salvation Army report released last month, prosecutions for cannabis have declined by 70% since 2010. And the number of Maori being charged with cannabis offences has consistently declined, dropping by 57%. Kylie Quince, who is a Drug Foundation board member and was a member of the Prime Minister's expert panel on cannabis, has admitted, for more than 20 years, the police have pretty much turned a blind eye to low-level cannabis use and possession. Most people found with a small amount of cannabis are not charged, convicted, or punished. I think most people support the principle of removing heavy criminal sanctions for low-level marijuana use. But the overall objective of drug policy should be to discourage drug use. Any proposed laws reducing criminal penalties must be paired with increased investments in prevention, treatment, and drug driving and workplace enforcement. So we agree with the current police approach. The use of alternative resolution options, including pre-charge warnings, tipairanga, the drug courts, and referrals to health and other support services. But they also say that their focus continues to be on targeting the organised criminal networks who supply these harmful drugs to our communities. The possession and use of illicit drugs remains illegal and prosecution remains an option in order to prevent harm and to keep people safe. You see, the coercion of the law is an important factor in requiring people to get the help and addiction counselling that they need. A smart arrest policy can both provide a societal stamp of disapproval and provide an opportunity to intervene and stop the progression of use. And this is as much a public safety policy as it is a public health policy. It is both a health issue and a criminal issue. It's not one or the other. Oh, just one other thing. Remember during the referendum last year that the Yes crowd said we had to legalise cannabis so that sick patients could get medicinal marijuana products? Remember this ad from the Drug Foundation?
Terms that we all feel make sense for us, for our nation.
Terms that could give those who could benefit from medicinal treatment much better access.
Yeah, it drew a stack of complaints because medicinal cannabis is already legal in New Zealand. The referendum was about recreational use, the right to get high. But the medicinal regime introduced by Labor in 2019 isn't working that well. Not one new medicinal cannabis product on the shelves in the last 2 years. Product hard to get, expensive if you can find it, and GPs not that keen on prescribing it. In fact, the government has just announced an extension to the registration period for new products to try and meet that required criteria. So National MP Dr. Shane Reti, yes, a GP, had a private member's bill to fix the regime read in Parliament last week. And here's what Dr. Shane Reti's proposed law would have fixed in the current government regime.
The first, here are 6 proposals from the bill how retail accessibility and affordability can be accelerated. The first is positioning of low-dose medicinal cannabis products on the over-the-counter framework. Secondly, provisional consenting from MedSafe. Thirdly, follow-up clinical trials at Phase 0, Phase 1 and Phase 2 only. Fourthly, controlled importing of approved quality low-dose product. 5, GP prescribing without specialist co-signing. And 6, pharmacy dispensing as is done in the US. We also need to tighten up regulations around licence eligibility and locations. It is wrong that an inmate who is currently in prison for a serious offence such as murder is eligible for a medicinal cannabis licence and that active gang members can be employed in the industry. It is also wrong that medicinal cannabis can be grown beside a wahitapu and a school. Here are suggestions then from this bill tightening up the regulations to make this framework more enduring.
That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Suitable products over the counter, MedSafe consenting, clinical trials, appropriate products imported, GPs able to prescribe, pharmacy dispensing, tightening of regulations around licences and also locations for growing cannabis, and a ban on smoking it. You don't smoke medicine. Where there's smoke, there's harm. Now, during that same debate in Parliament last week, Green MP Chloe Swarbrick quickly exposed exactly what they want to use this debate for. She said Parliament needs to explicitly focus on the injustices caused by cannabis prohibition. Yep, It's about legalise, legalise, legalise for recreational use. Drug-free is bad. Have a listen.
I want to acknowledge the Honourable Dr. David Clark for really listening to me on and engaging on me with when he was the Minister for Health and the development of what is now the medicinal cannabis regulations, which was to explicitly focus on the injustices caused by cannabis prohibition.
Focus on the injustices caused by cannabis prohibition. So here's a debate about medicine, and the Greens want to focus on recreational use. Yep, it's about getting rid of drug laws and enabling a free-for-all. It's not about medicine. And guess what? Despite the Yes campaign pretending that they cared about patients and medicinal marijuana being available and effective, the Greens and the Labour government all voted against this law from Dr. Shane Retty. They wouldn't even send it to a select committee for public input. The other thing to note is that you probably didn't even hear about Dr. Retty's bill, did you? It was actually drawn before the referendum last year, but the media didn't tell you about it. Why is that? Well, the answer's easy. The Yes campaign, aided by most of the media, was keen to use the medicinal aspect to increase the Yes vote. Yet the referendum was clearly about legalisation specifically for recreational use. In fact, polling after the referendum found that 60% of voters who voted yes did so because they wanted cannabis to be made available for medicinal purposes such as pain relief. Yeah, you probably didn't hear about that survey either. The media didn't want to tell you. Let's be clear though. Family First supports the rapid expansion of further quality research into the components of the marijuana plant for delivery via non-smoked forms, approved and listed by the Ministry of Health, with appropriate funding, availability and pricing for patients. Ultimately, the medical profession should be dictating the direction of this debate. Neurologists, palliative care specialists and pain specialists, they should have a key role in this process, not businesses with a vested financial interest, and definitely not marijuana advocates with a hidden agenda of recreational use. Finally, let me leave you with the words of the head of the Helen Clark Foundation, which is a registered charity campaigning for the legalisation of drugs, all drugs. They admit that it's a war for drugs.
While the Yes campaign may have lost a battle, they are overall winning the war.
Please continue to stand with us as we fight against this war for drugs, for the sake of our children, families and communities.